Back in Itawamba County, Mississippi, in the gruesome warp of my enormous boyhood, a family lived down the street from us in a high, tiny, ramshackle, constipated house with mouse shit in the cereal bowls and holes in the children's faces, from which schizoid energies flowed in cyborg melodiousness like treble clef rivulets composed of liquid stone and subdued arpeggio machismo, a high white house of almost painful uprightness, and seeming to lean in my memory in the direction of the solitary tree in their front yard, which always fascinated me, bare year round and with branches as gangly and thin as spider legs that twitched continuously in the windless air, an air as heavy, dead, and stinking as the corpse of an obese man being lifted onto a stretcher by bitter paramedics with aching backs and grimacing faces. A small, crazy white house containing a man named Mr. Grimes, his wife Polly, and their children, aged 3 to 30 it seemed, all of whom managed to fit themselves in there very neatly, like the puzzles I had laying around with the large, wooden, strangely fuzzy pieces, relics left over from my infancy. And when I thought about the Grimes family down the street from us, the idea gave birth to strange scenes in my imagination as I pictured them all put away like Allen wrenches at night, their sweaty bodies arranged in strange geometrical concordance according to the most remote arcane principles of organization. One day at the end of summer, I found a baby bird alone in our yard, and when I asked my brother what I should do, he told me to go down the street and ask Polly Grimes, who, according to him, had a mysterious knowledge of such things. I'd known Mrs. Grimes from the scene that unfolded every year in November, a few days before Thanksgiving, when she would walk her giant body out into the yard, dressed in a large yellow muumuu, and chase down a turkey until she had its neck in the grip of her thick hands, whereupon she would swing the thing above her head like a Visigoth brandishing a mace. When the spine snapped, I always wondered at the delayed effect that occurred when the sound, coming to me from down the street, seemed off by a beat, like a man's speech not lining up with the movements of his lips on a television set with a bad reception. She was big. I'd never seen a woman that size in real life. She was like a solid plug from top to bottom with a nauseatingly globular appearance to her flesh, which, I thought, beneath the muumuu, was a great popsicle melting. Her knees reminded me unpleasantly of large, shrink-wrapped skulls and ugly tributaries, funk rivers going this way and that, existed in varicose myriad and complexity on her legs, which had all the foul plumpness of a corpse in the sun. When I knocked on her screen door, the wood floor moaned with a lowing sexuality, like a horny cow when her big feet mashed against it. The baby bird I told her about, I was keeping in the shed behind our house, setting it down on a bed of sawdust covering the bottom of an old hamster cage we had laying around. The interior of that shed is still endowed with a kind of blinding fidelity in my memory, though its insides were dark. It was here that my father kept the yard implements, the hose and the rakes and the weed whacker and such, and in there too was the lawnmower with its rusty gas cap, a machine I'd learned not to look at, fearing it would kick a pebble that would fire like a prehistoric bullet at my eyes, and the rototiller used to churn the strange brain-colored clay in our backyard, a device with its loud, garrulous voice, as if it were singing and gargling gasoline at the same time, which I regarded as one would a Pleistocene creature of antediluvian simplicity and sluggishness of intellect, a slow, dumb-witted animal with flesh made of rusted metal that shot foul black smoke out its top, and which rifled through the mud with its spinning metal hands as if it were meticulously looking for something hidden in the earth, a ring, a key, a coin, a scrap of paper with the name of some old fling, some sweet Louise, real creamy, real dreamy, with its gaping mouth stretching impossibly and its eyes like Neptunian stones. The baby bird, in the silence and heat of the shed, seemed to suffer not in any conventional way, but rather seemed outraged, flabbergasted by the constituents of existence itself, as if in those black eyes the measure of the world was being staged. Polly Grimes, having taken me to a bed of black loam in a muddy corner of her yard, showed me where I could find earthworms to feed the bird, which she instructed me to cut up into little pieces and to feed them to the bird individually. In a Sanka can, I put as many worms as I could find and took them back to the shed. And just as I was walking across the yard in the twilight to wash my hands from the spigot on the side of the house, my mother called me inside to eat supper. The 6 of us, my mother, my father, my 2 brothers, my sister and I, sat down at the table in our tiny house, and one by one we succumbed to the examination of my father's stares, which served as a form of speech, the only one in use, for we were not allowed to speak at the supper table unless we were spoken to, and now I stole glances at this fleshy man with his mustache and slick back hair, sniffing as if it were a daub of catfish putty, the okra that my mother had fried for dinner. His large nose, bulbous on the end and red from all the cheap beer he drank, sucked in the aroma of this greasy dish, crunchy on the outside but sickeningly soft, almost gamey on the inside, his blue eyes narrowing so that they were pursed like lips, a finicky redneck with fat fingers in a weak stomach, heavy jowls, and a soft, sick look of dissipation, both whitened and reddened by the television's spectral light, menthol cigarettes, potted meat with sody crackers, natural light beer. Billie Jean, my father, had succumbed over the course of an existence of poverty and privation to certain obdurate psychological complexes in regard to food. He couldn't eat chicken. My grandfather had made him slaughter them when he was a kid, and the sight of the gizzards in the pan had nauseated him. Rice he couldn't have because he'd been in Vietnam. But what he couldn't tolerate above all things was improperly prepared over-easy eggs and undercooked okra. We often ate breakfast for supper. In our household, it was a single word like horn or piano, breakfast for supper. My father was a connoisseur of breakfast for supper. As I mentioned, we weren't allowed to speak. This lent the dinner table an eerie silence, peopled by the racket of the jungle outside the window, where water moccasins lay dreaming and coiled in the kudzu thickets, hungry and asleep. For a reason that no one could fathom, Billie Jean punctuated this silence, tropical, fecund, by dicing very rapidly, in staccato style, his fried eggs with his fork. Tap, 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 tap. This went on for long, gruesome intervals during which I remarked to myself the almost feminine beauty of his face, wrapped in an innocence of earnest concentration. When he had diced them up into tiny pieces, he would then take one of these small scraps of egg and place it on the end of his fork on the very edge of the tine. With an eye that flashed with a sort of minute fugitive psychosis, he regarded the tiny morsel, his mouth opening slowly, his strange, oddly short and fat tongue starting to protrude, changing shape as it sharpened on the end, coming to a point as it grossly elongated. It was upon this point, at the very furthest extremity, at the very last aghast tip of his tongue, that he would place the scrap of egg. For a long moment it existed there, in absolute isolation from every phenomenon in existence, both conceivable and inconceivable, while the constellations wheeled in their delirious revolutions in the sky over his head. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the whole thing went down the drain. What at first appeared to be a slight tremor of displeasure soon ballooned rapidly into a supernatural disgust which seemed loaded with something, as if it contained an actual putrescence of some kind, as a coconut contains milk, a half palpable fluid, 2 parts vapidity and 1 part existent matter. The rest of us knew the routine from there. Billie Jean would slowly lower his fork, setting it delicately on the plate, whereupon he would kick back his chair, rise up to a standing position, and look down at his plate as if it were not a dinner plate but a satanic dais on which lay the universal profanation. With a movement that always fascinated me, in which I performed in front of the mirror sometimes when I was alone in the bathroom, my father would throw down his napkin onto his plate. "I ain't eating this shit," he'd boom. "I'm going to the McDonald's." Then we'd all sit there looking at each other, listening to his tires burning out on the road as he tore ass into the night. I'm going to stop there and make a number 2. Make a version number 2.